Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Health IQ and Direct Mail. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. Happy New Year. Happy 2020.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. Boy, you know what? It feels like forever ago since I last spoke to you. And in fact, last time we did this, I was sitting in your kitchen. And now we're across the Atlantic from each other again, which is sad, but you know, it's been a nice holiday break. We've had a little time off from the show, and we're ready to go with a bunch of new ideas.
Do we even know how to do podcasts anymore after all this time?
I don't know. I practiced while we had our time off. I was on Clockwise last week. Yeah, I was on Clockwise.
Very nice.
I filled my podcasting void with Dan Moore and Micah Sargent. So
I use my time to play Pokemon, of course, because that's something that I do these days. But also, I've been thinking a lot about stuff that I want to write about, and I've been cleaning up all my, and you actually wrote about this in the monthly log for Club Mac Stories members last month, cleaning up things like Apple Notes and my reminders lists, and in my case also my shortcuts. I've been using this app that I'm going to write about on the website called Launchcuts. That is basically like this utility that allows you to create folders for your shortcuts, and you're not really creating folders inside the Shortcuts app. It's a little different than that. It's a little strange, but it'll make sense once I write about it. So I've removed something like 200 and something shortcuts from my library. It was really a lot of craft had accumulated in there over the years. And so I've been doing that, and in the process I came up with some new shortcuts ideas that I want to do on the website and the club. So it should be a fun couple of months ahead.
Oh, that's cool. I did the same thing with shortcuts, mainly because I had some problems during the iOS 13 beta that duplicated a bunch of them and eliminated a bunch of variables. I just had a huge mess on my hands. So I really burned everything to the ground and started from square one with the shortcuts that I need to do some of the work that we do at Mac Stories. And then just kind of going back through the Mac Stories Shortcuts archive, which, you know, if you haven't checked it out before, definitely go to macstories.net/shortcuts, because we have an incredibly long list of all sorts of shortcuts that Federico has created over the years. And there's a bunch, really, the vast majority of shortcuts that I use are right there. So I started with the archive, built that list back up, and then I went through some of your more recent articles, as well as the lists that we have over on the club for club members. And that kind of rebuilt my entire shortcut library.
Now that you mentioned that, here's a quick sort of teachy tip for everybody. If you have shortcuts that I made, so like Mac Stories shortcuts that you grabbed either from the free archive or from the club archive, something that I discovered is that if you installed all the way back in June 2019, the first beta of iPadOS or iOS 13, that first beta might have sort of cleared all your variables inside of the shortcuts. And even if you update it later to beta 2, beta 3, all the way to the stable release, those shortcuts were actually never fixed. They didn't fix themselves. But here's something that I discovered, because in cleaning up my shortcuts library, I actually tried to run these old shortcuts, and they were not running because all the variables were like disconnected from each other. So what you gotta do is you gotta delete those shortcuts, remove them from the Shortcuts app, re-download them from the Mac Stories Shortcuts archive, and when you install them, they will be fine. All the variables will be fine, because Shortcuts basically had a problem in the first beta of iOS 13, and the transition process, like between iOS 12 to 13, was not working perfectly well in the first beta, but now it's fine. So if you have old shortcuts and they're not working anymore, and you've always put off, actually going in there and fixing them, just remove them and reinstall them from the Mac Stories archive, and they will be okay again.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I'm glad you shared that, because I did notice the same thing after I deleted mine, because everything was totally fine once I reinstalled them.
Yeah.
All right, Federico. So why don't we get to this week's topic? Because, we talked a little bit about how we clean things up during the holidays, and I do really the same sort of process. But I also use the time to experiment with things. But today I want to talk about an experiment that actually predates the holidays because I sprung something on you and Ryan, I think in October. It was quite a while ago now, when I confessed that I had been producing the Club Mac Stories newsletters in Safari on my iPad, which you guys had no idea about, right? Remember that?
Yes, I remember when you one of your many confessions.
I know I have so many of them. and here's the thing about it, though. I mean, that was kind of a big deal, amongst the three of us, only because MailChimp, which is what we use to produce those newsletters, had been impossible to use with our complex template for years. I mean, I've been working with you on the newsletters since pretty close to the beginning, not quite the beginning, but I've been doing the production stuff since towards the end of that first year. And MailChimp, while it has an iOS app, it's mainly designed to kind of check analytics, use their built-in templates, and do a few other things like manage the email lists that you have. It's not meant to build custom templates. And our newsletters are built on, especially when you talk about Mac Stories Weekly, are based on very complex templates. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about that, but also talk more broadly about Safari in general, because, over the summer, we talked about a lot of the apps that were being updated as part of iOS and iPadOS 13, but we never really got to Safari. And I think Safari is one of those apps that when you look at it at first blush, you're not going to really notice a whole lot that's different. I mean, there are a few cosmetic differences here and there, but a lot of it's under the hood, and a lot of it takes some discovery, whether it's, discovering context menus and new tools that are kind of buried a layer or two deep. But when you take them all together, Safari is really now as was advertised, a desktop class browser that can do a lot of things that weren't possible before. And I'm not sure that a lot of listeners and readers of the site have necessarily gone back and tried the web apps and other things that they couldn't accomplish in past years using Safari and tried them again under iPadOS 13 or iOS 13 and seen what the changes are. Because I think the MailChimp example, even though most people I'm sure don't use MailChimp, it's a good example of a complex web app that wasn't possible to use entirely before, but now it's really equivalent to using it on the Mac, which is fantastic. I find it great because it makes my life a lot more flexible and gives me the freedom to pretty much choose whichever platform I want when I'm producing the newsletter.
Yeah, and it was like when you say impossible to use on an iPad, it literally was impossible to use. Like in iOS 12, you would open the MailChimp editor, which is the web interface to assemble newsletters using a pre-existing template, and it's it comes with a bunch of sections that you can drag around, and you can click in on a section and it opens a text editor on the side, and all of those features were actually impossible to use. For example, you couldn't even scroll with two fingers in iOS 12. And now I'm so pleased to hear that you've actually been doing this, and I was really surprised when you mentioned this to us. And it's sort of it feeds into the idea that the Safari update for iOS, and in this case specifically for iPadOS 13, was really meant to sort of act as a bridge between the iPad's touch interface, but also the requirements of desktop class web apps. And there's so much more, though, than just being able to load a desktop version of a website. And this is one of I guess this is one of the common misconceptions. There are a lot of people who were sharing at WWDC back in June of like, yeah, but you've always been able to load a website in desktop mode. But that's not all that Apple did with iPadOS 13. There were a lot of changes that, for example, Apple put in a lot of work to make sure that beyond changing the user agent, which is how Safari presents itself to websites, and now Safari for iPad literally presents itself as Safari for Mac. But beyond that, there's this smart thing that Apple is doing, and it's a lot of complex tech. But basically, they changed the iPad's viewport settings so that desktop websites can fit themselves on the iPad screen in regular size classes and still support touch events, which are translated to clicks. And all of this gets complicated really quickly. But basically, what it means is that if you're using Safari in full screen or in split view, unless you're using the really tiny split view with like the 70 or like, I guess 80-20 type of configuration on your iPad,
Right.
Safari will always work in desktop mode. So if you're using the really tiny split view or Safari in slide over, that's considered a compact size class, which means the Safari will still operate by default in mobile mode.
I think that's true on the iPad Mini as well. I believe that it
Yeah.
always does that. But we're coming at this mostly from the perspective of the iPad Pro, but I think that's true for the regular iPad as well.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, there's a lot more that Apple did, and I'm super simplifying here because this is not a web API show. But pointer events, for example, it's this
Right.
web technology that allows websites it's like an abstraction of what it means to click. And if a website implements pointer events, it doesn't matter if you're using a mouse or a trackpad or a stylus, or in this case, a finger, because the interaction is translated to whatever input method you're using. And so websites that use pointer events support clicks, but they also support touches. And so you can still touch the iPad screen, and that will be considered a click. And this allows you to use things like drop-down menus. So things like things that require a hover interaction. Obviously, you cannot hover with your finger over the iPad's display. Well, I mean, you can, but nothing will happen. And so Apple
Right.
implemented like this custom rendering engine in Safari for iPadOS that sort of preloads the web page and uses some complex heuristics to determine like where are menus where the user is supposed to hover, and if they do, what happens? Should Safari interpret that as a click, or should it reveal a menu? And so if you go on Mac Stories, for example, and you use the drop-down menu that we have in the toolbar, that will correctly expand in iPadOS, which wasn't always the case before. Media source extensions. This is another web technology that allows essentially JavaScript in Safari to deal with DRM'd content. In plain terms, you can now watch Netflix in Safari on the
Right,
iPad
exactly.
with support for DRM. Fun fact, if you open Netflix in Safari for iPadOS, start watching a movie or TV show, and then try to take a screenshot, it will not work. The screenshot will be black because of DRM protection, same as the Netflix app. And you can also watch YouTube. You can now open the YouTube website in desktop mode on the iPad, and you can change video quality. Still no 4K, but that's a separate issue. That's a codec issue. But you can actually use and watch YouTube in Safari. So, and also we should mention, and there's a whole section of my iPadOS review about this stuff, hardware accelerated scrolling of different parts of a web page. For example, in our case, the Mac Stories is a WordPress website. And before, the WordPress text editor didn't support the hardware accelerated, smooth, sort of a elastic scrolling of Safari. So you would place your finger inside the text editor and you would try to scroll and let go, like fling, the scroll bar, and it didn't work. It just stopped. But now that text editor behaves like any other text field. So you can just start scrolling and it's super smooth and fast and it's so nice. So a lot of technical changes in Safari for iPadOS.
Yeah, I think WordPress is really one of the better examples because not only is there that scrolling action that you just mentioned, but it has the hover events too. Because when you hover on a Mac over an item, a post in a list of posts on your website, it reveals a contextual menu like quick edit and a bunch of other things, and you don't get that. You didn't used to get that when you used it on iOS, but now you can. So that's been really nice to have. And it's, for me, the creation of the newsletters in MailChimp was one of the last tasks that I have on a regular basis where I felt like I couldn't do it anywhere but on the Mac. And I don't mind, doing it on the Mac. This is not a question of I want to abandon the Mac and go 100% on my iPad. All I want is the choice to use what I want when I want. Because a good example of the dilemma that this created for me regularly was anytime I wanted to go on a trip and had a newsletter fall sometime during that trip, I had to make the choice whether I was going to bring the Mac or the iPad. I couldn't bring just the iPad because I could only do the newsletter on my Mac. However, I like to have my iPad with me, and that's mainly because it has an always-on mobile data connection. So when I'm traveling, all I have to do is open my iPad and start working. Now, yes, I could tether. I could find a place that has Wi-Fi. But if I have my iPad with a cellular radio in it, I don't have to worry about those things. I mean, sure, I'll connect to Wi-Fi if it's available and save some of my data, but I don't have to fiddle around with tethering, which is not super reliable all the time. Nor do I have to worry about slow hotel Wi-Fi or whatever it happens to be. I just open my iPad and start working. And so if I'm gone for a few days and it happens to fall on a Friday when we publish Mac Stories Weekly, now I have the option of just bringing my iPad instead of what I used to do, which is I oftentimes brought both. And that's overkill, especially when you're only going somewhere for a few days. So it's a flexibility, it's a freedom, it's a matter of me choosing where I want to work as opposed to the task forcing me to work on a particular platform. That's why I like the fact that I'm able to work in Safari in kind of the same way that I work on the Mac. And really, Federico, it's been so smooth transitioning that workflow from the Mac to the iPad that, what I thought originally would be just something I did when I traveled has become something that I do regardless. I mean, maybe I'm just sitting at home and I don't want to work in front of my desk. I want to sit at the kitchen table and put together the newsletter. Or maybe I want to go out to a coffee shop for a couple of hours. It's really close enough to the experience on the Mac that the two are interchangeable for me now. And it's made a huge difference in just kind of how I get that particular work done. But more broadly, how I view traveling and getting away from my desktop. I mean, it's created more freedom for me than I really ever expected. And I've really enjoyed that.
This is great. And this is basically, when you think about it, the same argument in favor of using the iPad in general, like the idea of having freedom and having choice and having like a constantly available cellular connection and, even more choice in terms of apps. This is basically the reply that I send to people. Because every time, John, you should know this, every time I tweet about something like my Bridge keyboard, for example, sort of transforming the iPad into a laptop or recording podcasts on my iPad Pro, as I'm doing right now in this very moment, there's always that person on Twitter saying, oh, why don't you get a laptop? Don't you know you can use a MacBook instead? And yes, I'm fully aware of the existence of laptops. I do have a Mac. I have a Mac Mini, which I love, but I love choice and I love freedom, and there's nothing more beautiful to me than a computer that can transform itself. And, that idea of choice and freedom and versatility and flexibility, it works for Safari, but it works for the iPad in general. So I think it's especially remarkable that the new Safari was designed with this philosophy in mind of like, let's give iPad users more freedom because that's what the iPad is all about. But
Right.
there's a lot more to cover. Of
There
course,
is there is so much more to cover. I mean, that's really the tip of the iceberg. But I mean, I think your point is a really important one because with iPadOS debuting last year at WWDC, we got a whole bunch of features that were designed to make the iPad more of a general computing platform that can substitute for something like a Mac. And really, Safari, while it's been around since day one on iOS, is one of to me, it's really one of the cornerstones and one of the tentpole features, as Apple likes to say, of what is possible now. Because despite the fact that I mean, I'm sure people who've listened to the show for a while know that if I have my choice, I'd rather pick a native app, whether it's an iOS native app or a Mac OS native app. I'd rather have the native app. And I actually think MailChimp would be a better app if it was native. But that's not going to happen. And the reality is that most of us use a combination of web apps in our work and personal lives all the time. And now, with the changes made to Safari, the fact that you have to the fact that you can use those on an iPad makes everything so much smoother and so much easier, and it really adds more to making the iPad a general computing platform than almost any other feature. So I'm super sold and happy with the idea of web apps on Safari for iPadOS, but you're right, there are a ton of other features, and we want to kind of run through some of them because a lot of them aren't super obvious on first glance because a few, they're kind of buried in the UI a little bit. And so we want to kind of go over those because I think Safari is one of those apps that if you've been using it for years, it's very easy to kind of get into a pattern of using it the way you always have. But there's a lot here that's worth rediscovering and trying, whether it's something like MailChimp or WordPress or Squarespace or Google Docs or Google Sheets, whatever it is. It's worth kind of going back and retrying these things and seeing if they can, fit better with your workflows today than they maybe did a couple of years ago. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Health IQ. At some point during the last couple of years, you've probably created and maintained a healthy habit, whether that's getting enough sleep, working out, going for a long walk in the evenings, or just trying to eat better. If you live a healthy lifestyle, you could be rewarded for your efforts and your hard work with more affordable life insurance rates, and you could save up to 41%. Just take the Health IQ quiz, and they'll walk you through the entire process of applying. The policy is underwritten by one of their top insurance partners, and there will be a real-world person at the other end of the phone to answer any questions and chat with you. The savings are exclusive to Health IQ, so you won't find these anywhere else, but you do have to qualify to get the special rate. Slowly but surely, I've been trying to get back into shape, and I was really pleasantly surprised when I took the Health IQ quiz to see the kind of health insurance that I qualified for. And I'd really encourage people to try it too. It's super easy and fast and an easy quiz to take. To see if you qualify, go to healthiq.com/appstories to take the proprietary Health IQ quiz. Depending on your score, as well as other related qualifying factors, you can save up to 41% on your life insurance premiums compared to other providers. Again, that's healthiq.com/appstories to let them know we sent you and to start the process with the Health IQ quiz. There's no commitment, and you'll learn even more about the potential opportunities to be rewarded for your commitment to living healthy. One more time, that's healthiq.com/appstories. Our thanks to Health IQ for their support of the show.
Let's talk about some of the other changes in Safari for iPad OS 13
right.
because there are plenty of them. Site-specific keyboard shortcuts. Now, this is cool. Because you can now use desktop websites in Safari for iPad, it means you can also take advantage of a feature that websites can implement on the desktop, and that is custom keyboard shortcuts. Now, on iPad, usually you would hold down the command key on an external keyboard, whether it's a smart keyboard or a Bluetooth one, and you would see inside apps sort of like a cheat sheet of all the available commands that you can perform
Right.
from the keyboard. Now, if you're using something like Google Docs or Gmail or even the Fitbin website, for example, you won't be able to hold down the command key and see those custom sort of proprietary website keyboard shortcuts show up in the pop-up that you see when you hold down command. But if you actually perform and trigger those keyboard shortcuts, they will work. So if you use, I don't know, in Gmail, what it's like to archive something like A or K, I don't know. I don't know the Gmail shortcuts.
Something like that, yeah.
But basically what Apple has done is under the hood, Safari is actually prioritizing the custom commands of the current web page at the expense of its own keyboard shortcuts. So if Safari and a website share the same keyboard shortcut, the custom website one will have priority. So that will work instead of the Safari version of the same keyboard shortcut. So I use this myself in Google Docs and the Fitbin website, which is super well done on iPad, by the way. The Fitbin website, very elegant, very nice.
Yeah, it is good.
But yeah, you can use custom keyboard shortcuts and they will work. There's an all-new view menu. You might have noticed this. When you tap on the AA icon in the Safari address bar at the top, you will get this new menu that comes with a bunch of new options, really. You can see, for example, you can change text size. This is actually called Zoom. It's a Zoom option that lets you make the text bigger or smaller depending on your preferences, and you can change this later in settings. This is also how you can show the reader view. More on this in a second. You can hide the toolbar of Safari. You can request the desktop version of a website. You can manage content blockers, and you can get a list of all website settings. Now, this is nice because I love the idea of having more controls available. I love the fact that I can quickly change per website settings directly from this menu. I do prefer, though, the fact that all of these options are also available in settings. So if you go to settings, Safari, you will get a list of all these features, and you can go in and see all the domains that you've customized the default setting for, and you can change it. You can delete the domain. There's a lot of permissions that you can fiddle around with. If you, for example, want to, I don't know, disable content blockers on Mac Stories and enable them on Google or YouTube or whatever, you can do all of that if you want. A lot of people are sort of torn on this choice. Apple changed the way that Safari Reader is activated in iOS 13. So before, it used to be that Reader was an icon in the Safari address bar. Now it's nested into this menu. So in theory, it takes one more tap to get to Safari Reader. But something that not a lot of people know, I think, is that when you open a web page in Safari, for a couple of seconds, you will see in the address bar the reader icon, which is a document icon, flash for a couple seconds. That means that Safari Reader recognized an article on the page. If you tap the icon during those couple of seconds, you will activate reader mode instantly. No need to open the menu. Later, also, though, you don't necessarily have to tap to open the menu and then tap again to choose reader. Anytime you're viewing an article, you can just long press the AA icon in the Safari address bar, and that will load Safari Reader mode instantly without showing you the menu first. And as you will see, there's a lot of tap and hold gestures that we're going to mention here.
They're all over the place. And once you do that tap and hold gesture to get to the reader view, then you also get the other options like what font do you want to use, what background color, all of that stuff. So yeah, I use that all the time. And I really like the tip about while the site is loading, because often if a site is taking a couple, 2-3 seconds to load, one of the first things you'll see is that reader icon. And if you just quickly tap it, the whole thing will, all the text will load almost instantaneously, and you're off and running really quickly. And the settings are nice to have there. I like the ability to, what I've done, especially since I updated to the stable version of iOS 13, is I do have content blockers turned on, but I will go through, and when I visit sites that I visit regularly and they aren't problematic sites as far as I'm concerned in terms of advertising, I whitelist them. I turn them off. So I do that for all the sites that I visit regularly that aren't a problem, and it's just a good way to I feel like it's a good balance between using content blockers and doing right by the sites that don't abuse advertising.
Yeah. And I was going to mention this later, but while we're at it, I'll just go ahead and talk about this. There are new share sheet options in Safari. So now when you share a web page, so you tap the share icon and you get the new share sheet, which is new in iOS 13. You see your contacts suggestions at the top for iMessage and Telegram and other social apps are starting to implement this now finally, and also AirDrop suggestions. But at the very top of the share sheet, you will see the title of the page, the domain, the favicon of the page, and a small blue button that says options. Now, if you tap that, you will see this new options screen, which lets you decide the kind of format that you want to share a web page as. So by default, it's automatic. So with automatic mode, it essentially comes down to the extension, to the destination app that you select to decide which format it wants to receive from Safari. So if you're using something like reminders, it'll receive a rich link to the page. But if you use the Save to Files extension, for example, it will get a .webarchive version, which is basically a full offline copy of the web page as a file. It's a .webarchive file. So the automatic option is the default one, and it changes the format of the web page depending on the destination app or contact that you select from the share sheet. But you can also manually override the format, and now you can choose between PDF, which, as before, it just prints a PDF version of the web page. WebArchive, which is new, the .webarchive format. It's been around forever on macOS, and it's so surprising to see it on iOS and iPadOS, but it makes sense because it's an actual full offline copy of the same web page as you're looking at it right now in Safari, but it's offline, and it preserves the look of the web page, it preserves the CSS, it preserves clickable links. So it's a full offline copy. I love this format. It's great for research and, future reference material. But also, you can share a Safari web page as a reader PDF, which means it creates a PDF version of the Safari reader view of an article, which is so nice because if you come across a long article that's surrounded by a questionable layout and you want to read your article later, you can actually create an offline PDF of the beautiful reader version with the layout of your choice. So you can create a sepia reader themed PDF, or you can create a white background one with the serif font. I love the fact that this is now possible. That Apple has turned Safari Reader from just a special view mode in Safari to an actual export option for the share sheet.
I have another share sheet tip that I want to share, which is Find on Page, which is new in 13, right?
It's new. That's a great tip. It's new in Safari View Controller.
Right, exactly. It's I don't know. I always found Find on Page to be a little bit buried and a little bit hard to access, but the fact that I can just kind of do it from the share sheet now, it's a great way to find particular content on a page.
Right. So it's in the share sheet, but if you're using Safari, you can use Find on Page in the middle section of the action list.
Right.
So scroll the share sheet and you will find it in the middle section. The middle section is actions that are exclusive to the app that you're currently using. But also, if you're using Safari, though, I guess most people use Find on Page by tapping on the address bar and just starting to type something, and then you will get the on this page section that shows you all the matches in the current page.
Right.
But if you're using Safari View Controller, you cannot tap the address bar. So Safari View Controller is the special Safari view that you get when you tap on a link in compatible apps. So for example, Twitter, the Twitter app for iPhone and iPad, when you tap on a link, it opens the link in a inline Safari view that doesn't actually take you to Safari. It's like a version of Safari running inside Twitter. Now, that version of Safari View Controller, doesn't have a clickable address bar. So the only way to use Find on Page in that mode is to activate it from the share sheet. That is an excellent tip, John. Well done. That's a good one.
All right. Well, thank you. You know what? I actually like using it in the full-on version of Safari too.
Oh, yeah?
Because
You do?
I don't know what it is about the address bar. I always think of the address bar as the place where I actually type in URLs, and maybe that's a little old-fashioned, but I don't like using it as the search box for some reason. So I do a lot of times just go straight to the share sheet and pick that option from the middle section, even if I'm in full-on Safari. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Direct Mail. If you're looking to grow your customer base, connect with fans, or build a following this year, a super cost-effective way to reach people is still email. For over 15 years, Direct Mail for Mac has been the go-to email marketing app for businesses, nonprofits, schools, and other organizations that want to expand their reach and connect with customers. It's designed just for the Mac, so you can get your work done in half the time using all of the Mac technologies you've grown to love. Drag and drop, keyboard shortcuts, integration with other apps, and a whole lot more. Direct Mail has eye-catching templates that are infinitely customizable and look great on all devices. Direct Mail has a helpful customer support service staffed by real humans, too. There are no chatbots and no AI, just friendly folks ready to help and to lend a hand at no extra charge. Send your first campaign today with a free download of Direct Mail. Listeners of this show will also save 10% off all of their full-featured pricing plans. Head on over to directmailmac.com/appstories to experience the top-rated email marketing app for Mac and see how they can help your business grow. Again, that's directmailmac.com/appstories to get 10% off all of Direct Mail's full-featured pricing plans. Our thanks to Direct Mail for their support of the show.
You want to talk about the new start page?
Yes. So this is one that my Safari start page is largely polluted by Stephen Hackett.
Okay.
Because, all right. And I think you know what I'm talking about because, all right, when, if you go to a start page and a blank tab in Safari, at the top, you'll have favorites, and that's not really changed. Below that now, though, you have Siri suggestions. And Siri suggestions are a combination of links that the system finds in your messages, reading list, bookmarks, and open tabs on other devices. And for me, a lot of times that's dominated by URLs that are in a group thread we have in messages. And Steven has some kind of really strange links that he shared with us, and I find them in there a lot, which makes sometimes taking screenshots a little bit awkward. But it's kind of interesting. I mean, there is a lot that you can get from this, I guess. I mean, if you have a reading list that you don't look at regularly, it's kind of a nice reminder to see the kind of things that you've stored away and maybe want to read at a particular time. I'm not as enamored with including bookmarks there because for me, bookmarks are usually sites that I go to do a particular task. They're more web apps than they are like bookmarks to articles or things I want to read later. But open tabs is a good one. I think you know, Federico, that I have a lot of open tabs on a lot of different places. And
It doesn't surprise me, really.
So, of course it doesn't. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, maybe I'm on my phone and I've got 500 tabs open across 4 other devices. A lot of times iOS does a pretty good job of surfacing one of those there for me to take a look at. Although I'll tell you, for 2020, I've become a a big fan of closing tabs, and there's some new ways to do that in Safari as well.
But you know what I'm going to suggest?
What?
In the start page, if you tap and hold on Siri suggestions, you actually get a bunch of interesting options. So open the start page, scroll to your Siri suggestions. I'm sure that you will find some. The system will have some for you. And if you long press on one of them, a preview of the page will open as a context menu. But at the bottom of the context menu, you will have some buttons. So the first two are copy and opening background, which are pretty self-explanatory. You can copy the link or you can open the link in the background. But you can also, there's a red button that says, don't suggest this website. So if you never want to have, twitter.com suggestions in there, you can long press and select this option to never see that domain in your Siri suggestions ever again. Or you can choose to suggest less from that particular source. So for example, if it's an iMessage suggestion, you can tap and hold and select suggest less from messages. And so links shared on iMessage with your friends will not pollute your start page as much if you start training the system this way.
The unspoken context here is I can blacklist Steven, is what you're telling me.
Well, not Steven specifically, I'm afraid. Just just messages in general.
All right. Well, I'm hoping that iOS 14 brings the Stephen Hackett mute button.
Sure, that could also be an option.
No, that's a good tip. That's a good tip, though. I actually didn't know that you could long press on those and get options.
You can long press a lot of things in the new Safari. For example, if you have multiple Safari windows open, which is of course a new feature in iPadOS 13, what you can do is you can merge your windows as tabs. So go to one of your Safari windows, tap and hold the tabs button. And now, of course, this is only on iPad because you can only create windows on iPad. And if you do have multiple windows open, you will see in the menu that appears next to the tab icon, a new option called Merge All Windows. And that will take all your windows and merge all of your tabs into a single window. So that's nice. It works I think the Mac has a similar feature. I think maybe.
Yeah, it does under the window menu. And I just did it. I only have 29 tabs open on my iPad
29,
Pro. So only 29.
Good progress, John.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can, let's see what we haven't covered. You can this is something that I do all the time. You can long press tabs. So select a tab, long press on iPad. And I think it also works on the iPhone. But this is weird. It only works on iPhone in tab view. So, the iPhone has like the carousel view for tabs, like the vertical sort of 3D view of your tabs.
Right.
It doesn't work in that mode, but open tab view, turn your iPhone sideways in landscape mode, and then
where
it will
it's a bunch
work.
Right, where it becomes a bunch of tiles, basically.
Yes. So if you long press a tab, you can copy the link to the tab. You can rearrange all your tabs by title. You can rearrange all your tabs by website, which is useful if you want to group all your open tabs by the name of the website. So 9to5Mac will be before Mac Stories, which will be before Twitter, for example. But also, and this is something that I do all the time, you can close all the other tabs except the currently selected one. So like if you're like John and you open too many tabs and then you realize, I don't need all of those other tabs, I just need the current one, long press the current tab, choose close other tabs, and all of them will be gone forever. You just be with your currently selected tab.
Right. And, part of the reason I end up having so many tabs open is because I don't know, I feel like I might have to go back to that website. And, really what I should be doing is not keeping them all open, but I should be long pressing on the bookmarks button, right?
Yes, that is also an option this year. If you long press the bookmarks icon, if you have multiple tabs open, this doesn't work if you only have a single tab open, you will get an option to add bookmarks for all of your currently open tabs. By default, they will be saved with the name saved tabs in a new folder called Save Tabs. But you can, of course, customize the name of the folder upon saving all those tabs. This is great if you're like doing research on a particular topic and you end up with 30 different tabs, which I'm sure, John, is the reason why you have 29 tabs open right now.
Yes.
And you want to save them all as a set. You can do that. You can long press the bookmarks icon and you can save them all at once, which is nice. Even better, though, if you have a saved tab set as a folder in your bookmarks, here's what you can do. Open your bookmarks, long press the folder, and you will get a context menu with some interesting options. The first one is copy contents, which will basically copy a list of the URLs of all the bookmarks contained within the folder to your system clipboard. So you will just have a plain text list of links. But also you can reopen all bookmarks from a specific folder all at once as new tabs, which is very nice.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I mean, I especially like the ability to copy them. I don't know, it's nice to be able to just kind of do that and use and send them quickly somewhere else in another app.
Yeah, but especially like if you have, for example, like a folder of bookmarks, and this can be your favorites too. By the way, it doesn't have to be a specific folder. But if you have like a set of bookmarks of like all the websites that you open in the morning, for example, and you have a folder of bookmarks called Morning Coffee or something, you can long press it and you can open all websites in new tabs all at once. So this is great if you're drinking your morning coffee, you want to check out all your favorite news sites plus Mac Stories, of course, and Twitter, of course, Mac Stories and Twitter if you really have to, I guess. You can do that with a single long press and you can open all those 15 tabs all at once.
Well, there is a teachy tip here too to be had, because when you're on your iPad and you're in the official Twitter client, now that they have trending in the sidebar, if you don't want to see all that nonsense in the sidebar, all that trending nonsense, just open Mac Stories in the sidebar. I mean, as long as you're not like Mike Hurley and have your dynamic text set to the smallest possible setting, that will work to get rid of the trending sidebar, which is pretty nice. Federico, I think one of the things we ought to cover before we go is the download manager, because I think it's fantastic that we have a download manager. I think our real world experience with the download manager tells us that despite the fact that it's now animated and shows that a file is downloading, people don't really notice it because we've had some experience with that with the club. But there is now a dedicated download folder in iCloud Drive. You can download files. There's a button up in the toolbar. You can tap it. You can see what's downloaded. There's a progress bar. You can even do things like drag files directly out of that popover that comes down when you tap on the download manager and drag those files right into other apps if you want.
Yeah, that's all true. You can reveal them in the Files app. It's all very well done. The problem that we're the question that I get over and over, especially since we started selling the Mac Stories shortcut icons, the icons to customize the look of your shortcuts on your home screen. Those come as a single zip file, a zip archive that you need to download after completing the purchase from Safari. And sure enough, when you tap on the download button on the purchase page, it starts to download, and it shows you there's a dialog box that says, do you want to download the file? And you tap yes, download, and then the little download icon animates in the Safari toolbar. But most people don't notice. And so many people have emailed me saying, do you know where my icons are? Do you know what my purchase is? Because I cannot find it anymore. And this is sort of like one of the sort of funny consequences of shipping a better feature. But because people are so used to the old And arguably a worse way, now they don't know how this better system is supposed to work. Because before, you would tap on a download button in Safari, nothing would happen. But at the end of the download process, which was happening invisibly in the background, the downloaded file would take over in full screen on the page, showing you like this big icon saying icons.zip. What do you want to do with this file? Like that was a worse process because it was happening in the background. People had no idea that a file was actually downloading. If it was a large file, it was actually even worse because nothing would happen for several minutes. Like it was objectively worse.
Like your review ebooks, that was definitely an issue.
So I was getting emails about that, like, where's my review ebook? Because I tap on the download button and nothing happens. And I needed to explain to people, well, yes, actually it is happening in the background, but you don't see it. Now you do have a download manager. You can actually download files, multiple files at a time. And if you tap on the download manager, you actually see progress. It's all very well done, and you can customize the download location. But people don't know that when you tap on the download button, it actually goes into the download manager. And they don't see the icon. They don't see. I don't know what the solution is. Honestly, maybe the download manager should just pop up by default, like on the Mac. I don't know does it pop up on the Mac? I don't know. Or maybe there should be like a Safari notification that tells you your file's been downloaded. I don't know. It needs to be more visible. That's my point. It needs to be more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else we think we should cover today, Federico?
I think we've gone through the entire list of all the Safari features that we were supposed to mention. I mean, you can. We mentioned web archives. You can, of course, long press everything. This would be my final tip. Just in Safari, long press everything, and I'm sure you'll find something. Whether it's a link on a web page, you can long press it to open a preview. I think the only thing that doesn't work with the long press, honestly, is the share icon. Because everything else, you can long press and something will happen. You can long press your bookmarks, for example, I don't know if we ever covered this, but in Safari for iPad, if you have your favorites bar shown underneath the address bar and you long press one of your favorites, you will get a menu that says open a new tab. So you can also do that. The only thing that doesn't work with a long press is the share icon. Everything else, do try to long press it and you will get a bunch of options.
Yeah, I mean, even the new tab button, you can long press on that and see your recently closed tab. So if you accidentally close something you need again, it's very easy to get it back. So yeah, that is definitely the best tip is just long press everything and see what you come up with. You
long press the back button, you got a bunch of options to go back. You can choose where to go back. So
that's true.
The only thing you cannot long press is the share icon.
All right, Federico, that's a good place to stop. And it's a great way to start 2020. I want to thank our two sponsors again. That's Health IQ and Direct Mail. And of course, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is also on Twitter and Instagram. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.